the cases that are brought against these pro-Palestine journalists. Mariam, since you're involved in both cases, maybe you can tell us legal basics in terms of where they stand, as well as how they fit into these broader patterns of targeting pro-Palestine speakers and journalists in particular, and the kinds of attitudes, the kinds of xenophobia, Islamophobia that you need to overcome to advocate in these cases.
Sure, I'd be happy to, and hopefully my remarks won't take up that much time. I really am super grateful to the Freedom of Press Foundation for putting this together, as well as having, the privilege and pleasure of being able to hear from Sammy, Sumaya, and Sam Judy. Um, I think it's obvious to all of us that the people on this call, the panelists, are very appreciative for collective work that defends a free press and protects dissent. Without a doubt, as is styled the title of this panel, we're looking at those whose voices for Palestinian causes have caused them to undergo this type of, detention is one form of, we could call it suffering, but in reality, it's an oppression. I do want to highlight that the common thread between Yakub and Sammy is that they are both, I took this down when Sammy was speaking, outspoken, confident, and courageous. They both speak English. They both are privileged. Much to Sammy's chagrin, he's a British citizen, but he was also lucky enough to be in California. Uh, you know, for each one of them, there are countless others who lack those attributes. And when you look at the conditions of detention that both Sammy and Sam have spoken to, clearly we're looking at treating people like animals, excessive force, lack of access to counsel, and lack of medical care. When I see the panelists and I recognize that half of you is Jewish, I think that that's a really interesting place to be in terms of where the pendulum is in this country. So to speak to Yakub's case briefly, and we've got Samantha and Chris on the call to be able to really dive into the legal aspects of it. I just want to give some background. He's a Filipino-American photojournalist, community documentarian living in Dallas, came to the US as a child, grew up here living in the US for 24 years. 12 of those years he had DACA protection. His great-grandfather and great-uncle were awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for their service in the US military during World War II. No criminal record, repeatedly been approved for DACA protection, most recently in May of 2024, with a valid approval until May of 2026. So much like Sammy, the government seeking to terminate status and based on social media posts when they have been visible, peaceful chroniclers of Palestinian human rights activism. Specifically to Yakub, as Sammy mentioned, he's been at the forefront of exposing due process violations, particularly miscarriages of justice and inhumane prison conditions in cases prosecuted in the war on terror, including Dr. Afia Siddiqui, as Sam mentioned, the HLF defendants, and now, ironically, the victim of the very governmental overreach and state repression he has long documented. So in September, when he was suddenly detained by ICE after years of lawful presence and reporting, his pickup was rapid, again, without meaningful access to counsel. And at one point, during a second abduction, when he was transferred in the middle of the night without notice to his attorneys, resulted in the confiscation of his Quran, his prayer beads, his prayer rug, the things that actually sustain him. As Sam mentioned, he's universally described by those who know him as gentle, curious, generous, and deeply principled. So when our communities lose journalists like him to state detention, it certainly dims our public understanding and democratic participation. Again, I'm going to have, hopefully, I won't take up any time on the legal side of it since Samantha and Chris can speak to the habeas case and what it argues, and especially our most recently amended petition that exposed this shocking bond hearing that took place on November 3rd, during which the government attorney and immigration judge Suzette Smikle weaponized Yakub's faith and speech. I do want to come back to that. But before I do, on Sammy's case, although he was able to, portray himself as a jovial person, we were mostly laughing, we were smiling during what he described. what he described nevertheless remains entirely horrific. Picked up on his way in between domestic flights after getting through security, swarmed by 9 different agents in plain clothes, told his visitor visa had been revoked by the Department of State after he had come to this country on invitation to speak, after he had been to this country lawfully multiple times in the past for the very same reason. I think it is outrageous. I'm glad that you could laugh about it, Sammy, but being escorted to a government vehicle, as you said, just like it was in a movie, parked curbside outside of your terminal where you're handcuffed, patted down for weapons, and to add insult to injury, having your handcuffs checked for tightness and double locked for safety, that's actually in the government submission. So, when we talk about what the official reason given and formal allegation made in these cases, a visa revoked, possible potential of DACA status, no additional rationale, looking at your social media comments, but then also slyly in whispers saying that the detentions are based on national security grounds, right? Equating the desire for peace and justice and freedom for the people of Palestine as support for terrorism. In Sammy's case, particularly, as he spoke of that premonition that Laura Loomer had about his detention, that people basically like Sammy would be considered unpatriotic, even though they were invited to speak at conferences where free speech is the cornerstone of the event. And Sammy himself had just said something really interesting, and that is about the American people and what we represent, our value of being open-minded and always being willing to give a person a fair shake. Punishing both Sammy and Yakub for their stances on the war on Gaza and being punished for standing in allyship with US citizens who expressed solidarity against the genocide. Clearly, some sort of signal from up on high that was heeded. So in terms of that last bond hearing on Yakub's case that I'll circle back to and turn it over to the rest of our esteemed panelists, Immigration Judge Smykel found that Yakub's social media activity, which included sharing videos of himself teaching martial arts, liking Instagram posts of Quranic verses, and sharing footage of an event on Dr. Afia Siddiqui's case held at a Dallas mosque, constituted proof that Yakub endorsed and espoused terrorism. She equated that to him being a danger to the community and a flight risk. And for me personally, you can see based on how I dress, my personal opinion is that when Muslims speak of jihad or Sharia or martyrdom, we are vilified and crucified. And yet when Christian Americans like Charlie Kirk speak of spiritual warfare or living by biblical law, or when his wife, his widow, calls him a martyr for a cause, they are praised. When jihad in Yakub's case was explained in its true meaning as a struggle, a spiritual and moral striving, the judge and the prosecutor dismissed it and immediately equated it with violence and terrorism. When presented with Arabic calligraphy and an image of a fighter on a horse, imagery that's rooted in our culture and our faith, the reaction was not one of curiosity or neutrality, but one of suspicion and xenophobia. And we've come too far in this country to be at this juncture where this constitutional crisis and crisis of conscience has us scrambling on the back foot. That's all I've got for now, Seth. Thank you.